The words were like a blade, slicing through the air in that boardroom. "You're too weak to lead." I can still hear them as clearly as if they had been carved into stone. The tone wasn't neutral. It was dripping with mockery, with certainty. And the worst part wasn't just who said it. It was the silence that followed, the silence of agreement. No one defended me. No one stood up. Some colleagues smirked behind their hands. Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to risk being associated with me. In that moment, I wasn't just doubted. I was dismissed. I felt my face burn. My throat tightened. My palms went slick against the notepad I held. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to shout, "You're wrong about me!" But the words lodged in my throat, blocked by the echo of their judgment. Too weak. The phrase wrapped around me like chains. The meeting moved on, but I didn't. I sat in that chair, staring at the table, feeling smaller and smaller as every minute passed. Their voices became background noise, muffled under the roar in my head. Too weak, too weak, too weak. It played like a mantra, cruel and unrelenting. And the worst part, for a moment, I believed it. That night I went home and collapsed into bed without even eating dinner. My reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, eyes dull, shoulders slumped, a hollow echo of the person I thought I was. I replayed the scene over and over. Every chuckle, every glance, every second of silence after those words were spoken. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I wasn't meant to lead. Carl Jung once said, "Shame is a soul-eating emotion." And that night, shame devoured me. But even in that darkness, a spark flickered. Because beneath the shame was anger, not loud, not wild, but quiet, steady, persistent. Anger at them for underestimating me. Anger at myself for almost believing them. Anger at a world that equates strength with loudness, with arrogance, with cruelty. What if they were wrong? What if my strength wasn't the kind they could see, but the kind they would feel, the kind they couldn't deny once I finally stood up? The next day at work, the whispers continued. People talked around me, not to me. My name became a joke in hushed corners. Every glance felt like another reminder. You don't belong here. You're too weak. But I stayed silent. Not because I agreed, not because I had given up, but because silence can be powerful. Silence can be preparation. Let me ask you, have you ever been called weak, too soft, too small? Have you ever had people look at you and decide, without knowing your heart, that you didn't have what it takes? If you have, then you know how heavy those words can feel. But you also know this: sometimes that weight becomes fuel. That's what happened to me. I carried those words with me, not as a curse, but as a challenge. They said I was too weak to lead, so one day soon I would lead. And when I did, I would leave them speechless. The words didn't just sting in the moment. They echoed for weeks. Every time I stepped into the office, I felt them pressing against me, heavy as chains. You're too weak to lead. It became the lens through which I saw myself, the whisper that followed me into every meeting, every email, every decision. It didn't matter that I had worked late nights, carried projects on my back, solved problems others couldn't. None of that seemed to count anymore, because now, in their eyes, and dangerously in mine, I was the weak one. The collapse came slowly. It showed up in small ways first. I stopped volunteering ideas in meetings, afraid they'd be dismissed before I even finished. I let others take the lead, shrinking into the background, convincing myself it was easier not to try. Then it showed up at home. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying that boardroom moment over and over, the smirks, the silence, the shame. My chest tightened each time, as if the humiliation were happening again. Food lost its taste. Sleep lost its comfort. The joy I once felt for the work I loved dissolved into dread, and the cruelest part, their words became my own. When I made a mistake, even a small one, I whispered to myself, "Too weak." When I hesitated before speaking up, I muttered inside, "Too weak." When I thought about the future, I sighed. Maybe they're right. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But in those weeks, I didn't feel like I had a choice. I felt like what happened to me had already decided who I was. Colleagues noticed the change. Some pitied me, offering awkward smiles. Others avoided me altogether, as if my weakness might be contagious. And a few, emboldened by the insult that had been spoken aloud, began to treat me like I really didn't belong. "Don't worry, I'll handle this." "Are you sure you can manage?" "Maybe someone else should lead the presentation." Each comment was another stone added to the weight already crushing me. There were nights I considered quitting, drafting resignation letters in my head, imagining walking away from the office and never looking back. The thought was tempting, not because I wanted to give up on my dreams, but because I wanted the pain to stop. But every time I pictured myself leaving, something inside me resisted. It wasn't stubbornness, it wasn't pride, it was something deeper. A voice, faint but steady, whispering, "This isn't the end, not like this." Let me ask you, have you ever been so close to giving up that it felt easier to disappear than to keep fighting? Have you ever felt the weight of words crushing your spirit until you believed them yourself? That's where I was. And yet, in the middle of that collapse, a seed was planted, because while they had called me weak, they had also given me something without realizing it, a challenge, and I was about to rise to it. The collapse didn't last forever. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the anger beneath the shame began to grow. The same anger that had flickered the night of the insult now smoldered hotter. I started to ask myself, what if strength doesn't look like what they think it does? What if strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but the one who refuses to be silenced? What if leadership isn't about dominating, but about standing tall in the face of doubt? Those questions became my fuel, because if I was going to survive this, if I was going to prove anything, it wouldn't be by their definition of strength, it would be by mine. The opportunity came disguised as a crisis. A major project, one that had been delayed for months, costing the company time and credibility, was suddenly without a leader. The person in charge had quit unexpectedly, and the higher-ups were scrambling. Meetings were called, voices raised, fingers pointed, and then, almost as if fate itself were testing me, someone asked, "Who's going to step up and take this?" The room fell into silence. Eyes darted around, waiting for someone bold enough to volunteer. A few names were suggested, but each was shot down for one reason or another, and then, slowly, inevitably, the silence turned toward me. The irony was sharp. The same people who had called me weak were now staring at me, half expecting me to shrink, half hoping I would. Some smirked as if daring me, others raised eyebrows, curious to see if I'd crumble again. My heart pounded, my palms grew slick, my throat tightened. And then, from somewhere deep inside, I heard the whisper again. "This isn't the end, not like this." I raised my hand. "I'll do it." The room reacted just as I expected. A few chuckles, a scoff from the corner. Someone muttered under their breath, "This should be interesting," and of course, the inevitable, "Are you sure you can handle it?" But I didn't flinch this time. "Yes," I said firmly, "I can handle it." The decision was made. The project was mine. And with it, the weight of every doubt, every insult, every whisper of weakness. That night, fear nearly swallowed me whole. I sat at my desk long after midnight, papers scattered, plans half-formed, staring at the sheer mountain of work ahead. Every voice of doubt returned. "Too weak. Not ready. You'll fail." But I refused to let them be the last word. Instead, I began to prepare. Preparation became my obsession. I studied every detail of the project until I could recite it in my sleep. I stayed late, came in early, filled notebooks with ideas, diagrams, backup plans. I asked questions, not to look weak but to make the work stronger. I sought advice from people who knew more than me, refusing to let pride keep me from learning. I rehearsed my presentations until my voice no longer shook. I practiced answers to every possible objection, every criticism I knew would come. I didn't just want to survive this project. I wanted to lead it so well that no one could ever again question my strength. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And in those weeks of preparation, I chose. I chose not to be the person they named weak. I chose not to be defined by their silence. I chose to become the leader I had always been, even if they hadn't seen it yet. But preparation wasn't just about the project. It was about me. I worked on my posture, learning to walk into rooms with confidence, even when I felt none. I practiced looking people in the eye, holding their gaze until they looked away first. I trained myself to breathe slowly, to speak clearly, to let my words land with weight, instead of rushing to fill silence. Because leadership isn't just about knowledge, it's about presence. And I was building mine. Let me ask you, have you ever prepared for something so deeply that every fear became fuel, every doubt became a reason to try harder? Have you ever faced a moment that terrified you and instead of running, you dug your heels in and said, "I will not fail myself"? That was me. The day they gave me the project was the day they thought they had set me up to fall. But what they didn't realize was this: I was preparing to rise. And soon, the very room that had laughed at me would fall silent. The day arrived faster than I expected, weeks of preparation condensed into a single morning, and as I walked into the conference room, I could feel the weight of every eye turning toward me. The long table gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Laptops were open, pens poised, not because they were eager to listen, but because they were eager to watch me fail. And in the front row sat the ones who had spoken those words. "You're too weak to lead." They leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed, smirks tugging at their lips, waiting. My heart thundered. My palms grew slick. For a moment, I thought my knees might give way. But then I remembered the nights of study, the notebooks filled with plans, the whisper that had carried me through. This isn't the end. Not like this. I set my notes on the table, straightened my back, and began. The first words came out shaky, almost fragile. A few people exchanged glances, as if to say, "Here it comes. This is where they crumble." But I didn't. I steadied my breath. I let the silence hang for a moment longer than usual, forcing them to wait for me, not the other way around. And then with every sentence my voice grew stronger. I walked them through the project step by step, anticipating their objections before they could raise them, addressing problems before they could pounce on them. The slides weren't just numbers and charts. They told a story, one I had rehearsed until it flowed like water, and slowly the room shifted. The smirks faded, the whispers died, pens began to scratch notes, heads began to nod. They weren't just listening, they were following. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's what I felt in that moment. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't mimicking strength I didn't have. I was leading my way, not by shouting, not by intimidation, but by clarity, preparation, and conviction. Halfway through, something happened I'll never forget. I paused to emphasize a point, letting my words settle. And in that pause, the room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the lights above. Silence. Not the silence of dismissal, not the silence of mockery, but the silence of attention. The very silence I had once feared was now mine. They were waiting for me. The final slide clicked into place. I looked around the room, meeting their eyes one by one. "And that is why this project will not only succeed," I said, "but set the standard for everything we do moving forward." Silence. And then, applause. It started with one person at the far end of the table, then another, then the whole room. Hands came together, some reluctantly, some with genuine energy, until the sound filled the space that had once been filled with doubt. The very people who had called me weak were now clapping, and my critics, they sat frozen, mouths slightly open, no words left to throw. I had left them speechless. Let me ask you, have you ever turned a room that expected your failure into a room that couldn't ignore your strength? Have you ever stood where you were told you didn't belong and made it yours anyway? That was me. And in that moment, I knew something that no insult could ever take away. I was a leader, not because they finally clapped, but because I had claimed it for myself. When the applause faded, I stood there in the glow of something I had never felt before, not just relief, not just pride, but certainty. For so long, I had let their words define me. Too weak, too small, too soft. But in that moment I realized the truth. Their words had never been about me. They had been about their own fear, their own limitations, their own shadows projected onto me. And I had just shattered them. After the meeting, people approached me, some cautiously, some enthusiastically. That was impressive. I didn't expect that from you. You proved us wrong. I smiled politely, but inside I didn't need their validation anymore. Because the moment I led that room, I had validated myself. Even the ones who had mocked me stayed quiet. Their silence wasn't dismissive this time. It was respect, or perhaps shame. Either way, it no longer mattered. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. People began to trust me with more responsibility. My name was mentioned in rooms I wasn't in. The very project they thought would break me became the one that built me. But the greatest transformation wasn't external. It was internal. Because I stopped carrying their voices with me. I stopped replaying their insults in my head. I stopped believing that leadership had to look like theirs. I had proven to them and to myself that strength can be quiet, steady, unshakable. And that kind of strength doesn't need to shout. It simply stands, and others follow. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." They had called me weak. They had tried to humiliate me. They had wanted me to shrink, but I chose to become strong in my own way. I chose to lead in my own way. I chose to define myself not by their words, but by my actions. Let me ask you one last time. Have you ever turned someone's insult into your fire? Have you ever proven wrong the very people who doubted you? If you have, then you know the truth I discovered. Real strength is not given, it's claimed. So yes, they said I was too weak to lead. But I led, and I left them speechless. Tell me in the comments, what moment in your life turned weakness into strength? Subscribe for more emotional stories of humiliation, healing, and transformation. Share this with someone who needs to hear. Your strength is already inside you. It's time to show it. And I'll leave you with Jung's words one final time. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And on that day, I finally became me.